disabilities, loose from all that hinders me. Nothing can hold me now. I'm standing on solid ground. The word of the Lord. I've got the victory over my enemy. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. My chains are broken. Thank God I am loose. Oh yes I am. Yes I am. I am loose. Oh yes I am. Yes I am. I am loose.
Shalom, Salem. We are, as you know, the place of peace. We come on our second transition of dealing with the Holy Week. This Monday, Thursday that we are transitioning over to Good Friday, in order that you can get a grasp and understanding of just what we're trying to do. We're trying to do here at Salem for you what nobody else is doing. And because you deserve that. You deserve the level best, and you deserve that which no one else has access to. And so my son and the staff, along with Elder Board and others, have sat down and came up with this idea of explaining the terminology that we've heard over and over again and again. Monday, Thursday, what does it mean? What is it talking about? And they have sought out the people who are known as chosen people, which is an ideal name. In order for you to understand what chosen people really mean, you've got to understand what is going on when Christ was making the transition from the old dispensation of the law to the new dispensation of grace. That's what you want to see. That's what you want to internalize as you watch and try to understand with spiritual clarity what is happening. This is the holiest week of all. There is no week any more holy than this week that we are in the midst of, right here, right now. We are beginning to experience, or continuing to experience, behind last evening's presentation, which was an awesome one to me. But we are beginning to experience here what Jesus was doing when he instituted the Last Supper himself and gave to the disciples and made sure that everything was in order as we were moving from the law to grace. You see, the Jews way back at that time were looking for the Messiah to come, yes. But they were expecting the Messiah to come and be to them, the Jews, what Caesar was to the Romans. They were expecting a Messiah that would come and fight them to victory, give them swords and shields and lead them into warfare, and they would win. And yet Christ comes to the world, teaching not warfare but peace, teaching not hate but love. Christ came to the world teaching an altogether different something that people had on their minds, and only God can do that. God steps in at the right moment, and God shows this transition that I'm coming not to destroy men, but I'm coming to save men. And so Christ, in this institutional supper, takes a helm and a roll of time and eternity and meshes them into this moment on Monday, Thursday, before that awesome Friday that we are having on today. What a better time to have these people to come and explain. These are Jews who understand that Jesus is the Christ, that though he did not come the way they thought he would come, and God never does what we think. Remember, he told us, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, says the Lord. And so he's coming, and he's going to be explaining to us again on this evening the Jewish conception of Christ the Messiah. Sit back, relax, get a pen and a pad. learn how it fits into the faith that we have as Christians, moving from the law into the realm of grace. Grace, God's redemption at Christ's expense, happened this day, 2021 years ago. I'll see you on the other side. God bless you.
Imagine yourself being an Israelite and in slavery for hundreds of years. You believe in this God who made promises to your forefather Abraham, who said that he's going to bless and multiply and do all these wonderful things. But you find yourself in Egypt as a slave, working for Pharaoh, making bricks in a hot Egyptian sun, day after day, day after day. And you look around and you say, is this the kind of life that God really wanted me to have? Is this what he meant by all those wonderful promises? So I can just imagine how many people would throw up their hands to the sky and just scream and say, Lord, why? Why is this happening to me? Why are we slaves? I wonder how many people would actually lose their faith because their conditions are so terrible. And while this God who supposedly loves them promised them blessings, they're not experiencing those blessings at that moment. So it would be very difficult to keep the faith, essentially, while you are slave and you're afflicted and beaten and starved. And so when we get to the story, that's why the plagues had to come. Imagine how many people's faith in this one God must have wavered. Maybe they came to believe that some of the gods of Egypt are the ones who are powerful, because after all, they gave Pharaoh the power to enslave them. But you see, the God of Israel had to show that he is greater than all the gods of Egypt. And that's why when Moses came to the river Nile, and Nile is actually connected to one of the deities, and he would put his stick into river Nile and turn it into blood. And it turned into blood. The God of the Nile River could not reverse that, could not change it, could not compete with that. It took Moses' action again to turn it back, and on and on and on. Every plague that we read about, every plague that we remember in the story of Exodus is really an illustration to the children of Israel that God is real, and that he's more powerful than this deity in Egypt. He's more powerful than that deity in Egypt. He's more powerful than this God. He's more powerful than that God, and on and on and on, to embarrass the deities of Egypt and to show that God of Israel is one true God. And of course, the Egyptians are supposed to see that same picture, that their gods are powerless, they're impotent, they can't do anything. It is the God of Israel who is one true God. And that's what they're supposed to recognize through this powerful display of plagues that their gods cannot stop. So the last plague, the death of the firstborn, the most terrible one, actually is tied to Pharaoh himself. Because guess what? Pharaoh himself thought he was a god too. In fact, that's quite well known that Pharaohs considered themselves to be sons of God. And so at that moment, the very death of the firstborn in every household, the death of firstborn from the smallest animal out there to Pharaoh's house, comes upon the land of Egypt. And that becomes the very plague at which point Pharaoh says, enough, I can't take it anymore, get these people out of here. That's the story of Exodus. That's the story of plagues. It is dramatic, it is pictorial, it is powerful, and that is what we remember as we sit down and we diminish our cup and we drink the cup of deliverance. The fact that God delivered us, not just so, but with mighty acts and wonders and miracles, so that our ancestors long time ago can recognize him for who he was, the powerful God, the mighty God that he was. So as we drink from this cup that we sometimes call the cup of plagues or the cup of deliverance, we sing some songs and we celebrate with thanksgiving. And every part of Passover is really laced with this idea of thanksgiving and gratitude. So there are several more items on my Passover plate that I wanted to tell you about. And so I will begin perhaps with this item right here. I have Hazaret. Hazaret is a root of a bitter herb. Anything will do. In my case, this is a horseradish root. It works really well. Those of you who tasted horseradish probably realize how incredibly spicy it is. So, of course, we do not chew on a root. The root chewing would be hard. What we have is this item called maror. Maror is ground horseradish. You take the root, you grind it up, and you can serve it on all sorts of food. What we do is we put it some on the matzah and we eat it. And if you eat a bit too much of this item, guess what? The tears of slavery will flow from your face for quite a while, actually, because this mixture is so spicy and so bitter. So, of course, what does it represent? Nothing we do in the Passover ceremony is just because that's something we do. It all has a meaning. It all has a story to tell. So, maror means bitter. It actually represents the bitterness of slavery. So we have one bitter herb to represent the bitterness of slavery. This bitter herb is yet another bitterness of slavery, because when we read in the Torah, the commandment, it says, you shall eat it. It meaning the Passover sacrifice, the Passover lamb itself. You will eat it with bitter herbs, plural. And so we always have to have more than one bitter herb to celebrate Passover. And horseradish does the job very well, gets the idea of bitterness across just perfectly. Now, there is another item on the table that's important to explain. The other item that we eat is called haroset. Haroset is this brown, mushy looking mixture, and different people make it a little bit differently. The recipe is somewhat alters from place to place. But basically, it's sweet. It's the opposite of the maror. It is not bitter. It is completely the opposite. It's so sweet. European Jews tend to take some apples and grind them with some raisins and nuts and honey and cinnamon and things like that, and make this mixture that kind of sits and blends together. All the flavors blend, and it becomes this sweet mixture that we put on matzah and we eat it. And it's completely the opposite. It's not bitter anymore. It's sweet. It's called haroset. Yemenite Jews, Jews from the East, a lot of times will use figs and dates instead of apples, but the recipes differ, but the idea is the same. What it represents is it represents the mortar which Israelite slaves mixed with their feet as they worked for Pharaoh, building those cities, making those bricks. So people always ask a question: why would you have such bitter labor being represented by sweet mixture like that? And the answer that the ancient rabbis give is this: no matter how difficult you find your circumstances, no matter how hard life may be, you realize that even if you don't have anything except dirt and straw under your feet, and that's all you have is clay, you always have the promises of God. And my friends, hope is sweet, because if you have God and if you have promises, you have hope, and hope is always sweet. And that's why this brown mushy mixture that represents the clay really is supposed to be sweet, because it represents the hope that we have in God. So completely opposite of the bitterness, there's sweetness. And the truth is, life is never just 100% bitter, and life is never just perfectly sweet. So a lot of times what we do is when we eat these mixtures, we actually put them together and put them on a piece of matzah and eat them together in this sandwich-like fashion. And it helps us to remember what life is really all about. Now, there are a couple more items that I need to explain here. Let's see, I have two that I wanted to talk about together in conjunction. So I have zeroah, the lamb's shank bone right here, and that's obviously tied to the Passover lamb. If you remember the story of Exodus, it's all focused on the Passover lamb, because on that night when the slaying of the firstborn happened, when God said that he's going to go throughout all Egypt and slay all the firstborn, he said that that particular plague will affect Israelites, and they are to take a lamb and they are to slaughter it. It has to be a perfect lamb, spotless lamb, And as it is slaughtered, the blood of the lamb will be put on the doorposts and on the lintels of people's houses, and then people are to go inside and they were to eat the lamb, and they were to roast it and in its entirety and eat it with the doors shut, really anticipating that terrible plague that was going to happen all over Egypt. But if God will see the blood on the doorpost, that means that the people are obeying his command. He will pass over those houses, but the houses that would have no blood, they did not bring a sacrifice. Of course, in those houses, the firstborn would die. So that's Zroah. So it makes sense that it's here. Actually, in Hebrew, Zroah means arm. So, but technically, this is a leg of lamb. If shank bone, if you understand the anatomy of a lamb, is actually a leg. But in Hebrew, Zroah means arm. Things don't translate exactly from language to language, but you get the idea. There's another item over here that is important to explain. A lot of times people don't understand this. It's an egg. It's a roasted egg. It's called beitzah. Beitzah is its common name in Hebrew, but it has another name, a more ancient name. It's called chagigah. And beitzah just means an egg. But chagigah has a special meaning. It's tied to the word chag. And if you want to understand the meaning of this egg, you really have to transport yourself with me thousands of years back into Jerusalem and understand why this item ended up on the Passover plate. You see, when people celebrated Passover thousands of years ago, what people would do is they would come to Jerusalem because the commandment was to eat the sacrifice within the walls of the city. This is something that Jesus did with his disciples. If you remember the story, he prepared for Passover. He searched for a place to stay, and he wanted to make sure to arrange to have a place to celebrate Passover, because if he wasn't careful, he's going to end up in not having a place. Jerusalem is a small city in the ancient days, but during the holidays, its population would swell 3, 4, 5 times its size. And so that means the space in a city was premium, as people would basically stream from every corner of Israel, and even outside of Israel, people will come from other countries. Jews from all sorts of places will come to Jerusalem for Passover celebration, and they would seek a place to stay and a place to celebrate. And that means every house would open their doors, and every dining room would become a banquet hall for the Passover. And so one of the things, of course, that were done on Passover, as it was commanded, is that Passover lambs would be sacrificed. And they would be brought as an offering, and they would be eaten and consumed that very night by all the people who gathered to celebrate, just like it says in the book of Exodus. That same reenactment, the story of Exodus would be told. And so as people gathered together, imagine all these thousands of people come into Jerusalem, and imagine how the population got really crowded. And every table would not just be mom and dad and a couple of kids. It would be mom and dad, couple of kids, people from across the street, their neighbors, friends, and relatives from out of town, all together gathered at one table. In fact, people would celebrate Passover usually in large groups. As many people as you could cram into your space, that's how many people you're going to have for Passover. So in those days, the commandment was to eat the Passover lamb, and the people were supposed to be actually exceedingly full. Now, if you don't know much about lambs, a yearling lamb is a fairly small animal. If you have a large party of people, it's not going to fill them up. So remember, Jesus and his disciples, they come together, they celebrate Passover. There's 12 disciples plus Jesus. So 13 guys, yearling lamb, that's not going to fill them up. It's actually not going to fulfill the custom of Passover. You're supposed to eat the Passover lamb, and you're supposed to be exceedingly full. Why exceedingly full? Because Passover is a feast of liberty. It's a feast of freedom. It's a feast of emancipation. It's a feast of blessing. It is us saying to God that, Lord, you've blessed us so much, we have more than enough. How do you know that you have more than enough? You eat and you feel uncomfortably full. That's how you know you had more than enough. You should not have had that last bite. So the idea is to eat food and be very full. And so if you have this commandment to celebrate Passover and be very full, but you only have one Passover lamb to share among all the people at the table, that might not just do the job. So what people did in the ancient times, in ancient Jerusalem, they would bring another lamb or a goat, and they would offer it first. And that was called Hagigah. Hagigah is a festival sacrifice. It is not obligatory. It is a free will offering to the Lord. People brought Hagigah just because they wanted to have a special moment of joy, to add to their celebration, to make it more special. So the reason why the egg represents Hagigah, well, because to have another bone would be confusing. The rabbi said that the lamb would be represented by a bone, but the actual second sacrifice, or the one that would be brought for the festival, you can't represent it by the bone. It would be confusing, so you need another animal product of some sort. And of course, everybody's got eggs. That's an easy one. And that's how the beitzah begun to be used as the Hagigah. And it was always supposed to be roasted, because the sacrifices in the temple were roasted with fire. They were not boiled, so that's why the roasted egg. So that's the tradition, that's the custom of the egg. So it doesn't have anything to do with spring or fertility or anything like that, or new life. It really is in remembrance of the temple sacrifice. And it is connected to the Passover lamb. Now, people always ask, and they're always curious, why do you have the bone on a plate and not the actual lamb? And that's a logical question. But I'm going to tell you this, that Jewish people today do not technically eat lamb on Passover. Any other day, that would be just fine. But on Passover, no. And the reason is this. You see, we don't eat lamb just because that's what's on the menu. We are supposed to eat lamb because that's what God commanded. But part of God's commandment is not to just eat lamb. The commandment is take a perfect lamb, spotless lamb, watch it, make sure it's perfect, sacrifice it to the Lord, slaughter it, then roast it, then eat it with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. Well, guess what? We could certainly do the eating part, but one part that we cannot do is the sacrifice. There are no sacrifices. Modern Jews do not bring sacrifices because there's only one place where those sacrifices can be brought, and that's in Jerusalem, on top of the mountain of the Lord. And the last time I looked upon that mountain, the Jewish temple is not standing there. And until that day, when the temple is standing there is no functioning priesthood, and there's no one to bring sacrifices. And until that day, we don't have sacrifices. All we have is a memory of a sacrifice. That's why we have the bone. But this bone is enough for me to have on my plate, for me to tell my children about the blood of that sacrifice lamb that was shed for the children of Israel in Egypt. That blood that became the atonement that essentially had provided protection for the firstborn of Israel, and God literally bought and paid for Israelites with the blood of the lamb. So I can use the symbolism of the story, and all I need really is a bone to tell it. I don't have to have the actual lamb. So guess what? On Passover, we'll have some turkey, we'll have some brisket, we'll eat something else, but the lamb will not be able to eat, because it is commanded for us to sacrifice it and not merely consume it. So those are the items on the plate. Now you see, as Jesus celebrated Passover with his disciples, he has tasted and eaten and participated in a very similar ritual to how it goes on today. If you remember the story correctly, when Jesus ate Passover with his disciples, it says that they were reclining at the table. Did you hear that part? Reclining at the table. Now today we sit at the tables, we use chairs, but back in those days they actually recline. And so it is a custom even today to have a pillow at our side. A lot of times when we celebrate Passover, to recline, to remember the custom of kind of laying on your side, as people did in the ancient days. We would have a pillow at our chairs to remind us that reclining represents something. Reclining represents freedom and liberty. You see, slaves were not free to recline and eat. Slaves never ate their meals reclining. Free people did. And that's what we're doing since those ancient days. We eat as free people because God freed us. So having a little pillow at our side helps us to remember yet other aspect of Passover that reminds us that God has delivered us from Egypt and we are free. We're His. We're not Pharaoh's. So as Jesus reclined with his disciples, something very interesting happened at his table. Perhaps you remember this story. Remember how he washed the feet of his disciples? And we talked about hand washing earlier on, and all these customs of purity are kind of lost on us. A lot of times when we talk about purity, it's something so ancient, so different, so far away, so distant, because we do not live in that type of a world. But I want you to imagine the world of Jesus and his disciples. You have to transform yourself again mentally to those ancient walls of Jerusalem and imagine what life was like then. Well, in the Middle East, water is not so easy to come by. It's actually quite scarce. And the ritual of cleansing yourself is much more meaningful. You and I just go out to the sink and wash our hands anytime we want to. We have running water. They didn't have running water. We take out the little bottle of hand sanitizer and squirt it in our hands, and there we are, 100%, 99.9% germ-free. That is our way. But they didn't have that. For them, water was a tangible symbol of cleansing and purity. And so Jesus washed the feet of his disciples at the table. Now, what about washing feet versus washing hands? We talked about washing hands, and that makes sense because we're going to eat with our hands. But what about feet? Well, once again, today we may wear shoes and socks, but in ancient Jerusalem, Israelites would have worn sandals. And as they walked on the dusty roads, the perspiration would make all the dust off the road stick to them. Imagine 12 guys walking into a room, not washing their feet after having walked for quite a while on the dusty, dirty roads, laying down, not sitting down, but laying down in a circular fashion around the table. And so if you're laid in a circular fashion, then of course you realize there's a little bit of an overlap, and that means my feet are going to be right next to somebody else's head eventually. So it says that Jesus got up and he washed the feet of his disciples because none of his disciples wanted to do it. You see, usually it's the job of a slave or a servant to wash the feet of travelers coming off the road. It's a ritual of hospitality that many people who would entertain someone in their home would offer. It's the normal thing to do. But the place where Jesus celebrated Passover with his disciples was not his own place. It was a rental, sort of say. Remember, he told them, go and see such a man. You will see him. Tell him the rabbi needs a place to celebrate Passover, and he will let you have the room. Well, of course, that's exactly how it happened. But that was not his own place. The master of the house wasn't there, so the disciples did not wash the feet because not one of them wanted to show that they hold the lowest position among all of them. You know, disciples always competed for who's the greatest or who is the best or who is most beloved. It's strange sometimes and funny, but in our own human nature we can understand how they always try to vie for the most important place. I'm going to sit to the right of the rabbi. I'm going to sit to the left of the rabbi. I'm going to hand him the bread. I'm going to hand him the cup. I mean, just think about all the different things the disciples talked about. A lot of times as they would celebrate something with Jesus or just even a common meal, they would talk about their important positions of authority. In a sense, they believed that he was the Messiah, but they were looking for special place of privilege next to him. And Jesus had a lesson to teach them because he knew he was about to die and he wanted to impart those words to them. So he was trying to teach them how to be servants to one another. He said, the Son of Man has come to serve. And that's exactly what he did. So when Jesus took off his clothes and took up a towel and started to wash the feet of his disciples, they did not want to allow him. Remember how Peter says, oh no, you're not going to wash my feet. Well, yes, because it is embarrassing when your rabbi, the guy who walks on water, the guy who resurrects the dead, the guy who takes the bread and turns it into a multitude of food to feed thousands of people, when this person tries to wash your feet, you would feel uncomfortable too. But nobody volunteered. And so Jesus tried to show a lesson of humility to his disciples, and he washed the feet of his disciples. Again, a very practical application of a very needed ritual at that time, which was also, by the way, quite spiritual. But what it showed service. to his disciples. Because if Jesus washed your feet, are there anyone that you wouldn't be able to bend your knee in front of and wash their feet? Because if he could do that to you, perhaps you could do that to pretty much anyone. And that's what he was trying to teach his disciples. There's a lot of lessons that he taught them that night. And one of the most amazing things that Jesus said is he said, I tell you, one of you will betray me today. And they all started looking around. Lord, who is it going to be? Is it me? Is it him? They were wondering, why would he even say such a thing? But Jesus kept talking about being betrayed because he knew that was the time. So he said, in a very Jesus-like way, it is the one who reaches his hand and dips with me at the same time is the one that is going to betray me. Now imagine the table that is set up in a circular fashion, and they're all laying together, and they don't have their own individual place settings. They're reaching for common food, and they're sharing it, and so they're dipping. What are they dipping? They're dipping matzah, the unleavened bread. What are they dipping it into? Well, they're going into the maror, the bitter herbs. They're going into Haroset. I don't know if that was around, but they have different mixtures on their tables that they're dipping their matzah into. They're scooping it up, and then they're eating it. They're eating this unleavened bread. And Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me, and it's going to be the one whose hand is in the dish at the same time with me. And it happened to be that Judas was reaching at the same time with Jesus. And so essentially he named him without telling everybody his name. It's an interesting story, but it shows to us, even that story demonstrates that they were eating the same traditional foods and they were dipping into these mixtures that you and I are talking about. And this was a very bittersweet moment for Jesus, I can imagine, because as he's surrounded by his favorite people, his disciples were the closest thing in the world to him. You have to understand, these guys dropped everything and followed him. His own family did not believe in him. His own family did not follow him around, but these guys dropped everything and they followed him to the ends of the earth. And while he's surrounded by them, he knows that one of them is going to betray him. And that's how the story goes on. So Jesus he leans over to Judas. This is how close they were laying. He just kind of leans over to him and he says, go and do what you're about to do, and do it quickly. And Judas leaves, and nobody thinks of anything special because perhaps Jesus just sent him to get some more matzah or something else. We don't know what the disciples were thinking, but they didn't think anything special of the fact that Judas left. Judas, of course, went to betray him and to get the guards. That's how the story goes. But you could see the Passover setting, the Passover celebration that happens there. I believe when Judas was gone, this is where the meal of the Passover stretches over throughout the whole evening. It actually kind of goes on in these courses as you taste the traditional foods and you taste a little bit of that and taste a little bit of that, then comes another course. As Judas was gone, I believe at that moment, Jesus probably lifted up that cup and he said, this is my body, this is my blood, and it usually happens in the modern celebration of Passover. This is after the dinner happens, after the meal is served. We start looking for that special piece of matzah that was hidden. Now remember what happened. We took the special bag, the matzah tash, and we took 3 matzahs which were inside, and we broke one and we hid it, and we put it away. So now it comes back. At this point in the Jewish celebration, this piece of matzah is unwrapped, and it is broken further, and it is shared with everyone at the table. Now, this piece of matzah has a special name. In Hebrew, it's called Afikomen. And Afikomen is, by the way, not a Hebrew word. It's not an Aramaic word, not even a Yiddish word. It's a very old tradition, and it is actually a Greek word. Afikomen is a Greek word. What does it mean? If you were to ask the rabbis, they would tell you it means that which comes later, which is not far from what it actually means in Greek. If you were to translate it from Greek, it does means that which comes later. Only all things in Greek are animate, and so all items, there's there's no it. In this case, it is a he. It's he that comes later. So Afikomen, that's what it means. But what's important for us to understand its meaning is where it came from. The special bag that I had with 3 pieces of matzah, if you were to ask people traditionally, the story would be told what those 3 matzahs represent. Typically, people will tell you, well, the 3 matzahs in the bag represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Or they will tell you the 3 pieces of matzah in the bag represent the priests, the Levites, and the children of Israel. There's like 3 categories of people within Israel, 3 subdivisions. And so there's lots of 3s in the Bible, by the way, and there's lots of traditions that can be told about 3s. And all of them are good. However, the problem is with this middle piece. If this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then why one of them is broken, hidden, and then comes back? Nobody can answer that question. This is where the analogy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob breaks down. This is where the analogy of the priests, the Levites, and the children of Israel breaks down, because nobody can explain which one of them was broken. What does that mean? Why do we wrap it? Why do we hide it? Why do we bring it back? I have a theory why it doesn't make sense, because I actually think that this custom was started by Jews who believed in Messiah a long, long time ago. And its meaning might have been lost on majority of people in the community today, but I do believe it represents the Messiah, because I believe at this point in the ceremony, Jesus would have taken the bread and you broken it and he would have said, "This is my body." Now you see, Jesus could have done that with anything. He could have pointed to the lamb and said, "This is my body." But he chose this bread, this unleavened bread. What's so special about it? Why would he say, "This is my body"? Why would he want us to remember him through bread? Why not remember him through the sacrifice, through the meat of the sacrifice, as we remember the Exodus story? Well, the truth is, I can hope and guess, but here's my guesses. I think the reason why he chose bread is because it is called the bread of our affliction. You see, none of these items on the table are meaningless. They all have meaning. They all have pre-existing understanding. And so to everyone celebrating Passover with Jesus, this bread would have meant lechem oni, the bread of suffering, the bread of affliction, the bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. And so when Jesus says, "This is me," he's pointing to his suffering. He's pointing to what he is about to do. He's pointing to this new Exodus that he is about to inaugurate. Only this time, it's not going to be the lamb. It's going to be him who is going to pour out his blood for our sins. The redemption repeats again, only this time it is God's own Son who is dying. So you see, the bread, it's quite special. What's special about it, of course, I told you earlier, it is unleavened. And leaven represents impurity and sin. So in a sense, this is a special bread without sin. That's the very picture of the Messiah that we have. He's the one who has no sin. Therefore, he can become sin for us. He can die for us because he himself does not have any sin. He's pure. He's special. And if you were to make unleavened bread, this is quite peculiar. The only way to really make unleavened bread, if you try this at home, a lot of times people would just roll out the bread and they would stick in the oven, and what would happen with it, it would bubble up and it would still be raw on the inside and it will be burnt on the outside because it's just water and flour and it's kind of difficult to bake through. So the way you do this is you actually flatten it and then you make a bunch of holes in it. You must pierce this bread. And the way we pierce this bread today, of course, it will take you forever standing over there poking your fork into it, and it will take a while. According to tradition, matzah is baked under 18 minutes. It goes from flour to being a completed product in under 18 minutes. No fermentation can occur in that period of time. So what we do is we use a little tool today. It's kind of like a spoke with it's like a wheel with a bunch of spokes in it, and people run it through a piece of matzah, and it makes a bunch of little tiny holes. And so it looks like matzah is striped. It is striped, it is pierced, it is unleavened, and as it bakes, the little tiny bruises, little bumps still come up. And so as I look at this piece of matzah, I often think about how it does look like a person's body, but the body that perhaps have undergone some suffering. So a beautiful picture of our Messiah, who is unleavened, without sin. So I think that's why he's chosen this. And then he took the cup and he said, of course, this is my blood of the covenant, right? But remember, these symbols, it may mean something to Christians today. It may represent communion. It may represent the Lord's Supper and all these things. But for the disciples in that room at that time, in the first century, they didn't quite have that meaning yet. That's something that was developed much later. How they would have understood this cup is the question. And the answer, of course, is found in the very promises. The 4 promises that I have told you about stand for 4 cups. So we've already talked to 2 cups. Now, the 3rd cup is the cup of redemption, sometimes we call it. And so that cup coincides with the fact where God says, I will redeem you with my outstretched arm. That's the promise. The 3rd promise, I'm going to redeem you with my outstretched arm. And that is exactly what the act of redemption is. An act of taking out of slavery and emancipating a person. And Jesus says, that's what I am going to do. Only the redemption that he brings is not from slavery to Pharaoh, it's slavery to sin. And that's the connection that he makes for his disciples. That's why he wants us to remember him with this particular cup. There is a 4th cup of Passover, and I believe that cup Jesus did not drink, or at least he did not want to drink. Maybe you remember the gospel story, and he said, I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine until I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Now, why would Jesus not drink the cup? What was that about? If you understand the meaning of the 4th cup, then the reason he said these words will probably become a little bit more obvious to you. You see, the 4th promise says, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. And when Jesus came to Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, some believed him and followed him. Some recognized him as the Son of God, and some understood who he was. They called him Rabbi. They called him Messiah. Peter said, you are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. So there's quite a few people understood who he was. But by and large, Jerusalem did not embrace him as the Messiah King. It was not his time. It was not his time. The Son of Man at that moment of history has come to suffer and die. So Jesus basically said, this cup is called in Jewish tradition the cup of Hallel, the cup of praise. When we drink from it, we sing Psalms 113 through 118. And if you were to read the text of those Psalms, a lot of them speak about redemption and deliverance and even Messiah. But the truth is, Jesus came to redeem, yet he knew that he would be rejected. Just as Moses was rejected when he tried to redeem the first time, he was rejected the second time he became the deliverer of Israel. The first time the Messiah comes, he is rejected. And he said, right now is not the time for me to drink this cup, the cup of praise. That cup of praise will come later. Jesus said, I will drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And he pointed to the time that is yet to come. So it's not that he's not going to drink that cup. It's that he is not going to drink it right then. Right then was a time for the 3rd cup, the cup of redemption, which for him meant the cup of death. You see, as they finished up their celebration, it says they went up singing psalms and songs, and they went up the Mount of Olives. And it is there in Gethsemane where Jesus prayed, may this cup pass from me. Which cup do you think he was praying about? He was praying about the 3rd cup, the one that he was about to drink, the cup of wrath, the cup of suffering, the cup of redemption. He prayed to the Father, may this cup pass from me. But if it's not going to pass, your will be done. So as they went up to the Mount of Olives and they sang the Psalms, we still sing the same exact Psalms today when we drink this particular 4th cup of the celebration, the cup of Hallel. much of the customs are still retained today, and they continue to go on. Even the custom of Elijah the prophet, you may know this or not, but there's a special place that is set aside for a special guest who gets a special cup and a place setting, and he's invited. And a lot of times we have kids go out and open doors and call him by name. His name is Eliyahu, Elijah. According to the prophets, Elijah is supposed to come to announce the coming of Messiah. And throughout Jewish communities, even today, this custom lives on, where people open the doors, look for Elijah. They set up a special cup for Elijah because they know the prophet is supposed to come into the world and announce the coming of the Messiah. So, of course, to those of you who are listening to me and watching this and thinking through the New Testament verses, do you recognize the Elijah that was to come? In the Gospels, Jesus points to John the Baptist, and he says he was the Elijah that was to come. You see, God's word is true. It is true in every aspect, and every prophecy, every promise is going to be fulfilled exactly as it was promised. We may not be able to see it. We may be obscured from that truth for a moment or for a time or for a season, but in the end, God is going to fulfill all things as He has promised. And that's what Passover is about. It is a celebration of God's faithfulness to His promises. Yes, it is about redemption. Yes, it's about deliverance. Yes, it's about remembering the Exodus and what God has done for us. But more than anything, it is His promises. Promise that God made to Abraham. He said, your children are going to go to Egypt and they're going to be there for a while, but I am going to deliver them. And that's the biggest promise of Passover that begins even in the days of Abraham, long before there's 12 tribes and 12 sons of Israel and things like that. That's what Passover is about. So as we wrap up Passover every year, we end with the same words that charge people to remember these customs and traditions and to not forget the story of Passover and to tell it to their children and their children's children in the same way from one generation to the other. And we always end with the same words of hope. We always say, Lashana Abaa B'Yerushalayim, which means next year in Jerusalem. And what we really mean by those words is that fact that everyone anticipates that the redemption is yet to come, that this Passover now here is not the ultimate Passover, that there's yet another time that's coming when all flesh will gather to Jerusalem and celebrate this great feast in the presence of Messiah Himself, just as the prophets have predicted. There are so many passages in the Hebrew Bible that talk about that era. Whether we talk about Isaiah or Zechariah, they talk about that moment in history when all the nations have gathered in Jerusalem. So we say, Lashana Abaa B'Yerushalayim, because guess what? When He comes, where would you rather be but not in His presence, in Jerusalem, in God's courts, celebrating this very celebration? So that's why we end on this note of hope. Lashana Abaa B'Yerushalayim. I hope that this message was inspirational to you, and I hope that you were able to connect some dots and see a little bit deeper into this beautiful ritual of Passover. And perhaps the story in the Gospels is starting to come alive to you in a way that you have not seen before. Whether it's the story of the unleavened bread or the bitter herbs or whatever it is that God is using to speak to you right now, think on these things and realize that the Lord is good.
Greetings and shalom again, Salem. We pray that you have enjoyed this presentation for Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday. It's very, very important that you mark your calendars for this upcoming Saturday. We're having a special drive-through at both of our campuses. At the Atlanta campus, the drive-through will be from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And on our Stonecrest campus, it'll be from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. All of our deacons and various auxiliaries are in place to receive you. As you come to those churches at your respective campus, we'll be issuing you a kit. Within that kit, you'll have your communion, your bread, your wine. It'll be a devotional, some other gifts and trinkets from our church to you that you'll be able to cherish and to use. There'll also be special places for our children and receptacles if you desire to leave your gifts or need offertory envelopes, etc. So we want to be certain that you mark your calendars for this upcoming Saturday, 9 to 11 at the Atlanta campus and 1 to 3 p.m. at our Stonecrest campus. This upcoming Sunday also is Resurrection Sunday morning, the greatest day in the history of humankind, when our Lord and Savior was resurrected with all power in his hands. And Dad has some amazing information that I'm certain that he wants to share with you about what you'll be the recipient of on that day.
Son, what I want to do, since it is the Sunday that I am preaching, which is the first Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, I want to first of all thank you all for the way that you have put together this drive-through in order that they can pick up, you, our sweet people, can get all that we need for the Lord's Supper. Because I am planning to preach a very special sermon that is congruent with the season and most especially with Resurrection Sunday. I'm going to preach on this Sunday from the subject, the crucifixion of Christ, plus the burial of Christ, plus the resurrection of Christ equals the gospel. Again, the crucifixion of Christ, plus the burial of Christ, plus the resurrection of Christ equals the gospel. And what we're going to do in that word when we finish, I am going to ask Elder Board to provide us with that very, very special film that he plays about the resurrection of Christ. And I want to get us at that sermon prepared with the bread and wine that you pick up on the drive-through. You'll pick it up and I'll get you prepared at the special time in the Word to receive the presentation that Elder Board is going to provide us with. And then in as sombered, spirited moment as possible, we're going to take the Lord's Supper together so that we all will be sharing the bread and the wine of our Savior as Christians moving forward from Resurrection Sunday with a resurrected new life in Christ. You don't want to miss this coming Sunday. By all means, drive through, get what you need so that you can be ready on Sunday morning to hear the word of God. Son, thank you again for what you have done and how you've led staff and the great work you all have done.
Yes, sir.
You have really, really done a great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're appreciative to our staff, as you said.
All right.
Yes. We also want you all to remember the importance of Sacrificial Sunday. Now, heretofore, here at Salem Bible Church, we commit ourselves in 3 different ways: in our community of worship, personally, and financially. But this year, as we told you at the genesis of our Lenten season, we wanted things to be different. We wanted things to be a bit more spiritual, to be more adapt to the times that we're living in.
Yes, and son, just let me say that we've tried as best as we can to take the gimmickry out of it. The Lord laid on my heart that you can't gimmick with him. All you have to do is teach his word, preach his word, show you the people the word, and that your spirit will meet his spirit. And that way we can have no better sacrifice. That's what we want to see on this particular Easter Sunday when the time comes for us to give our regular giving, and then over and above our regular giving, sacrificially, everybody is asked to be participatory. I've had people to ask, well, who do I give to? I see all of the ministers and all of the different pastors and ministries that are on. Which one do I give to? Wherever you are being fed is what you need to look toward in terms of supporting. My son and I committed ourselves when we got to where we couldn't come back on a Sunday because of the COVID-19. And we made our minds up back then that we were not going to miss no time preaching on Sundays, that we were going to give you all we had. And we've done that.
That's right.
Now, this coming Easter, Resurrection Sunday, we're expecting you to rise as never before. rise as never before. Get in your mind and in your heart what your need is. Sowing your seed over and above your regular giving to what your need is. And when you do that, you sit back and you just let God work. You let God bring that seed into the crop as he gets ready to move as our God. Everybody now, get up, step up, pep up. All roads lead to God's house, to God's purpose, to God's kingdom on God's day, Resurrection Sunday. I can't wait to get to the pulpit.
The very last thing that we'll do is we'll engage in a conversation about reentry. We know that the times that we're living in this post-COVID season, and people desire to come back together, but it has to be when it's safe. Here at Salem Bible Church, we would rather come in too late than too soon.
Right.
And the reason for that is because of you. We do not want our church to be a place where any person is infected unnecessarily, or any person is the recipient of COVID-19 or any other virus for that matter. We're fortunate because no one on our staff, since we've been closed, has contracted COVID-19. And that tells us that our protocol and our procedures to not gather people in our churches, because what people have to understand, when people come together, they want to hug. They want to reach out their hands. They want to shake hands. They want to kiss. They want to do a lot of things that human beings like to do. But we must be certain that when we come back together, that it is for the best interest of you, God's people. So on Resurrection Sunday morning, we'll be having that conversation, and you'll be an integral part of that in terms of how, when, and where those aforementioned things manifest here at Salem Bible Church.
And you all have done an excellent job in laying that out, and you, the sweet people of our church, are going to be the beneficiaries of the great work that they've done to make sure that we come back to our church in the order that we ought. I'm looking forward to that, son. Thank you all again for a job well done.
Thank you.
I am loose from infirmities and disabilities, loose from all that hinders me. Nothing can hold me now. I'm standing on solid ground. The word of the Lord. I've got the victory over my enemies. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. My chains are broken.